So Raine, you guys were honored with Walk of Fame a star in Toronto this past weekend. Canadians are going to be able to watch it on CBC on Canada Day. Um, what was that like for you guys to be recognized in that way?
I talked about the idea that when you start a rock and roll band early on, you have to, it's hard, right? You have to allow yourself to dream. And you dream about, I don't know, hearing a song on the radio for the first time or getting a record deal or, selling at a club, But the idea of getting a star on the Walk of Fame never, ever made it into that kind of bucket list of dreams. So, I mean, you know what? It's whatever. It's 4 or 5 days later. It still kind of feels surreal. It still feels like a dream, to be honest.
So, what was looking back at that time, I'm close in age to you guys. You guys just came out of nowhere, man. Navid and Clumsy, and it was just hit after hit after hit. Big tours. But I felt like there was no template for you guys to. I mean, looking back on it, there was no template for you guys to follow. You guys were sort of your own, originators. So what was the
Hmm.
goal for you back then in those early years?
That's what I mean. Like the dreams you have at the beginning are really small, and for us, it was we were working out of the studio, kind of like Weston, and just north of the 401. I don't know what we call that area, but we were just we were kind of like making an album, but kind of demos. And that's when I'd gone to CMJ in New York, like the College Music Journal Festival, and handing some CDs around and got all these calls. And so the deal was we had everyone flying in. We had like Interscope flying out and Geffen from LA. We had a bunch of labels from New York, and we had a few labels from Canada that came to see us. And Sony Music in Canada was just like, hey, we love what you're doing. We just want you to keep doing it. And it felt like the right thing to do, even though the idea and the allure of like an Interscope out of LA was a massive, but it just felt like they were going to want to take control over things too much so. And so we went with Sony and it kept expectations. I think even for Sony, they're like, here's, a little bit of money, finish the record and call us when it's done. And there was no timelines. No one checked in on us ever. It was kind of weird back in the day because, it just record deals weren't really like that. But that's what we kind of wanted. And then it just kind of started to grow. I mean, overnight success, like we toured Naveed through the U.S. We put 450,000 miles on a little half school bus that we made instead of a van. And we toured, we put all those miles on before Naveed really started to happen. So it took about a year and a half before anything really started to catch fire in the US and in Canada. So, we worked hard.
Was there an artist, another musical act that you sort of wanted to emulate, or whose career you looked at and said, "I wouldn't mind a career like that"?
I mean, at the time, we were post grunge, so we came up after, like Pearl Jam and Nirvana and Soundgarden and Alice in Chains. And even though we didn't sound like those bands, the fact that they were doing what they wanted, like it wasn't catered to anything but what they loved themselves that carried on to the type of fans they had. And I felt like just that authenticity was something we really tried to hold on to.
So you're out on the road. You've already played across Canada, and then next month you're in Toronto at Bud Stage. Has the tour given you a new perspective on the band?
Yeah, I'm not one, to be honest. I'm not the kind of guy that looks back and kind of basks in like whatever we've achieved or awards or any of that stuff. I could not really care much about it. I'm just more focused on what's next. Especially as a songwriter, you're always trying to write another song and you think that's going to be the best song that you've ever written. Usually isn't. But the idea for us was on this tour to kind of pay a little homage, calling it the OLP 30 in terms of the career we've kind of like, sketched out for ourselves. So I definitely told some stories on stage on that tour across Canada. I will do the same thing in the US this summer. And it was nice, I have to say, like for someone who doesn't like to do that, I really felt the kinship with the fans. Like this, we built this friendship with them over, so many years, and that's probably the most special thing. Like the biggest takeaway is just the fact that it was one of the biggest tours we've done in a long time across arenas in Canada, and the crowds were incredible. And it was different. It wasn't just like we're going to see LP. Like there was this communal kind of like gratitude in a way, which was really, really like really profound, if I have to be honest.
One of the things I remember about that time is just, having a Canadian band that you could get behind and go see and kind of feel proud about. Because growing up, I felt like we had Rush as a kid, and then Tragically Hip, and then there was you guys, and there was Moist. Did you feel that? Like, did you feel that you were part of this sort of new wave of Canadian music at the time, looking back on it?
Yeah, I mean, it's easier to see now. At the time, it was just really exciting. Like there were so many great bands doing incredible things, and it just felt like music was so vibrant back then. Even with smaller indie bands that, like I talk about bands like the Gandharvas, like I don't know what happened to them, but they were sick, and
Oh
it
yeah.
was for a moment there was like, just so much going on. I remember when we first came to LA, we did a big show for like the biggest alternative station down here in America called K Rock. And Rusty was on the show. And Rusty was just this little, I think they're from Hamilton, but it was like things were really popping back then. And yeah, looking back, man, what an amazing, amazing moment in Canadian music.
So what was the secret? I mean, look, 30 years doing anything, no matter what you do in your life, it's not easy. And to keep it all together is also not easy. So what was the secret ingredient to your sustained success
Yeah,
on the
yeah,
music scene?
you're not wrong, Mark. It's not easy, no matter what you're doing. 30 years is a long time to do anything. I think at the end of the day, like you get better as human beings. I think you get better at communicating. Sometimes you don't, but sometimes you just find, a much more balanced place in terms of what's important, what everyone's expectations are. But I think at the end of the day, what keeps OLP going is it's always about the song first. It's always about, are we inspired enough to go in the studio to write songs, to record music, and then go play it live? And I don't think that's diminished at all. I mean, we just came back from Nashville, months ago and recorded new music there that was on those three OLP 30 EPs. Like that was probably one of the most inspiring recording sessions we had in a long time. Away, just the four of us in a studio, far away from families and distractions. And it kind of felt like, those old days back at that studio up at Weston, Ontario. That's where it was. And that's the thing. So if you keep that as like your North Star, and it's not about money, it's not about whatever, sometimes people see from the outside. It's just about that feeling when you're in a studio and you're recording a song, you're like, oh my God, it's giving me like, it's making the hair stand up on the back of my neck. That's as simple and as base as it. And we've always tried to keep that, the forefront.
I saw this clip on social media, I think, from Edmonton, I think it was, where the crowd broke out into "Oh Canada" in the middle of your concert. I think it was after the Four Nations. And what was that? What was that like? I mean, it looks super cool. Obviously, I was just watching it through somebody's phone, but what was that like for you to experience that on stage?
I don't, it's hard not to think like that to me is it's almost like a heritage moment because we were watching the Four Nations Cup and like, we're at the whatever I think it's called Rogers Arena in Edmonton where the Oilers play. We knew the final was on between Canada and the US that night. So we're like, I was kind of looking at the timings. Like we usually were going on about 9:20. Game started at 6. Okay, it's gonna be over. So we're backstage in like the Gretzky Lounge watching it. And oh my God, it's going in overtime. And then we know that those arenas, like the fees for going over, the union fees, like it's like $10,000 a minute. And we're just like, man, I think we need to go on. So we did. We made a hard decision. We went on, knowing that a sold out arena of Canadians are probably going to somehow be on their phones watching the Four Nations Cup. We're like, it doesn't matter. Lights go down. We open up a Superman's Dead. And right at the end of it, I look to the side and my manager and my agent are kind of like frantic, like they're jumping up and down. And then you start to see it in the arena, and someone threw me an Edmonton Oilers jersey, a McDavid jersey, because he scored the winning goal on stage. I kind of just held it up, and all of a sudden, like 20,000 people erupt into "Oh Canada." I have chills thinking about it. Um, it was just this spontaneous Canadian moment. But the most important thing was that after that, because that was only the second show on the tour, and there was 16 shows. Every show felt much more united. Like it felt like all the garbage with the politics and the 51st state, it's like that washed away. And those arenas that we played after that, it was just an incredible feeling every night. And so I think a lot of it had to do with that moment, to be honest.
Recalling how I saw you guys in that small club in Chicago back in 2000, it got me thinking about maybe some bands that I didn't get a chance to see. So, Raine, I mean, obviously, there's lots of people who are going to get to see you guys on this tour that didn't get to see you back in 2000. Is there an artist, is there a musical act that you never got a chance to see that you wish you had?
There is one, and it's one of the biggest regrets of my life. We had toured, we were coming back from a tour in the US. I think we flew home from like Texas, and it was like we'd been on the road probably for like 18 months straight, and I was just exhausted. My voice was done, my body was wrecked. But we were on Sony, and so was Jeff Buckley, and Buckley was paying the Danforth Music Hall. And we got home like at like 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and I went to my little apartment in Toronto, and I laid down and I fell asleep and I slept through it. And I don't think Jeff Buckley ever came back to Toronto because he passed away shortly after. And not seeing him live is definitely a regret.
Wow, wow. Is there a moment that you can look at playing Toronto all these years, all these different venues, Massey Hall, Budweiser Stage, Scotiabank Arena, Lee's
Yeah.
Palace? Is there a moment you can like kind of pull through your Rolodex of your memories and sort of say this was a real highlight for us?
Yeah, we just did a show before we announced this OLP 30 tour at Lee's Palace to kind of kick off this whole campaign. And it was like walking back in that place. It's amazing, right? Like the smell of that like bad draft beer. It was exactly the same. Nothing has really changed about that venue, thank God, because we've kind of played, we played CBGB's back in the day, New York, and now it's like it's a fancy clothing store, and the Viper is still here in LA, but who knows how long that'll last. So the fact that Lee's is still there, smelling the same way, the show was phenomenal. That was a big highlight. In the sense of like we were talking earlier, it made it fun to remember like the days when I played there and there was like on a Tuesday night and there was 6 people in the crowd, you know? So to come full circle and be back there was pretty special.
We want to celebrate all things Canadian, especially around the show and your Walk of Fame announcement. Rain, is there a Canadian artist that you can look at that's had a big impact on you guys?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many. I mean, from Joni Mitchell to Rush to Neil Young, even the hip. But Leonard Cohen to me has always been I don't know, this kind of like elder statesman of Canada. And I just have so much I started in music more as a poet. I had, early on before I learned music, I was writing in these notebooks at school. During math class, I was writing, I was writing whatever you call it, prose, or I don't even know if they were poems, but I was just that was my vehicle to like get the thoughts in my head, things I were thinking out. And so, that's kind of Leonard Cohen-ish as well in terms of, poetry and then bringing the music. So I always had, I don't know, I'm a huge Leonard Cohen fan, but I've always felt a strong connection to Leonard.